Please, the stage is yours.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Clearly the coffee must be very tasty.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it was.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a great venue here. Pleasure to be here in Riga. Lovely city. So I was asked to speak, and I took the opportunity because it's a fantastic topic. It's a monumentous day, really, in the timeline of data. And I wanted to take you through this journey and talk a little bit about some very interesting topics that are close to sort of my heart. Three areas. I'm going to talk a little bit about genius, and I'll tell you a little bit what that means in a second. Second part is what does this data-centric organization look and feel like? And thirdly, around the need for data standardization. Okay? Crying out really for data standardization. Okay. Right, so let's start. So I call it pure genius, and people hate me for that because many firms they've struggled a lot to do Gdpr. They've been working for some of them over 2 years, some of them a year, some of them a few months. But regardless, it's something that's being seen as a burden, right? Because it entails a lot of work. Many firms have put in a lot of effort, invested significant amounts of money in the regulation. So in a way, when I say pure genius, people look at me quite funny, thinking, why are you painting this in this light? Okay, and I'm painting it in this light. First of all, let's look at the history, right? And this regulation took 4 years in the making. Okay, but it was well worth it. Okay. And in my view, it's one of the first pieces of regulation to have almost overtaken technology. We've been many years looking at digital, social media, and the advent of cloud computing. And the regulation typically with all of these things, it kind of lags behind, and somehow new regulation appears, it sort of catches up, technology moves ahead, and then regulation catches up. But this one is quite good. This one has been bulletproofed, right? They've bulletproofed this one. Okay? And it's almost like overtaken technology, because what they've said is, they've used legal language to say, you have to adequately protect the data. Okay? And so they've not been prescriptive, they said adequately protected. So now, everybody scratches their heads, thinks about how do I adequately protect? And using the latest techniques. Okay? They've not just said protect it, using the latest techniques, technologies, approaches, methodologies. Okay? So they've bulletproofed it. So now for the next 10 years, this regulation, right, will stand the test of time. Okay? And in a way, it's kind of like it's got a sad side to it, because you think, well, why does it take regulation for people to do the right thing? Why does it take fines? Data privacy regulation existed, still exists in many countries. So why is it that it takes such a heavy-duty regulation to bring everything in line? Okay. So good question, really, quite an interesting one. About how long do we think it takes data to travel from London to New York? Okay. Just think about it. People think maybe a couple of minutes, maybe half a minute, maybe seconds. Right. So just think about that. Okay. And the answer to this, it takes 30 milliseconds. So it takes 30 milliseconds for me to sit on my computer, right-click, save a file. Okay. That is, you blink, to give you an idea, we blink at 300 milliseconds. So this is like 1/10 of the time it takes you to blink. That information has traversed the Atlantic. Okay. So it's quite incredible, right? And if you want to cause havoc in an organization, I'm not suggesting people do that, but you right-click, you drop a file, right, and it moves to the other side of the world, right? And then you have people running around for months and months discovering why, how, what it contained. A simple right-click, save. That's all it takes, right? So you can imagine why the regulation is so important, right? This is an interesting one. This is basically how it travels from London to New York. So you have these cables, apparently, that run underwater. Nobody knows exactly where they are. They're somewhere. And actually, it's fascinating because these people were genius. At some point, they created this blue one, because there's one going top down, one at the bottom. And I thought, that's genius, because they made it go faster, because they created a straight line. I thought, I wish I was that smart, right? So that's basically, that cable there is what, transfers data. It's an optical cable. It's only that big, apparently. It's not very big at all, right? And so that's quite incredible when you think about that and the digital economy and the way data traverses the planet. So let's move forward. So this is the way I encourage organizations to summarize GDPR. Okay. Now, this is quite important, right? And I've been working, a couple of years now on GDPR and on data, right? And I was trying to simplify it and because everybody says, what is it, and sometimes you present to executive boards and you have literally, literally a 10-minute, 15-minute slot squeezed in between other presentations to the board. And you think, how am I going to summarize this thing, complex legislation, articles and recitals to the board? And I distilled it and it became, a paragraph, and then I'm working away. And that's basically what I ended up with, right? So it's a long journey, it looked like one sentence. I'm exhausted, right? But anyway, I really like it because, to me it represents GDPR. And, it's a duty to respect and protect personal data regardless of who or where it's being processed. Right? Every one of these words, right, means something, right? So in other words, the duty, if you think about the ethics, right, respecting the individual, protecting the security aspects, and then regardless of where or who is being processed. So, it doesn't matter if you pass it to a third party, it doesn't matter. It's still your responsibility. You have that obligation. It carries through. The right to be forgotten, you clear it, you've got to chase it through the chain. Where did you push that data? To whom did you give the data to? To which suppliers? So, that sort of captured the controller, the processor, the technology, right? So I tried to embody all that in that one statement. And interestingly, I sort of pitched it to a senior executive, and I said, do you like it? I said, let's use it, It's great. So away we go. And then about 5 minutes later, I said, and you believe it, right? You do believe it. And there was like a couple of seconds pause there, staring at me, right, thinking. And then it dawned, right? It dawned on him what this actually meant, right? And, in order to comply, right, culture is the key. Right? You're going to have policies, you're going to have standards, you're going to have a lot of areas to comply with. You will have educated the staff, you would have online training, classroom training, everything. But culture is the key, right? And if people can say the statement and believe it, and you hire people who believe the statement, then you will be successfully implementing GDPR. Okay? Because regardless of policies, it takes one person, right, to damage the reputation of an entire organization. One person, one right click, one email, one open access database where you have personal data extracted and wrongly emailed somewhere to a Hotmail account, right? That's what it takes. So that's why, to me, culture is a massive piece. So let's look at why ethical. Okay, so yeah, we've got to be ethical, and a lot of organizations claim to have ethics. Okay, well, ethical because if you look at the regulation, this phrase, the rights and freedoms, appears 77 times in this piece of legislation. 77 times, the rights and freedoms. So when people say, oh, we have a complex case and we don't know whether to protect, not to protect, it always, finally you ask that final question. Okay, what does it mean? Does it jeopardize the risks to the rights and freedoms, and to what extent? And you answer that, and that basically gives you the answer to what extent you need to develop solutions and approaches. Okay. The other piece around this, why data-centric? So I said three things, right? We said, culture, we talked about data-centric, we talked about ethics. Why data-centric? Okay, why is that important? You've seen a lot of presenters today talk about data, right? And if you look at this, right, this is a word cloud. The word cloud, for those of you who may be not aware, is simply a word count within the text. So how many times do these words appear in the text? Okay? And data pops up right bang in the middle. It's the most commonly mentioned word in the regulation. Okay? So data is at the very heart. Where is it? Who has access to it? What does it mean? In which databases is it stored? In which unstructured documents does it sit? It's data, it's data, it's data. It's all about data. Right? If you can't get data right, it's not going to work. Now, interestingly as well, I think there's a misconception in some quarters where just because, and this is a digital conference on security, right? And people think just because I'm digitally secure, that means I'm compliant. And nothing is further from the truth. You could be 100% encrypted and secure and actually blatantly non-compliant because you have the legal obligation, you've got the controller, the processor, the transparency to the data subjects. Okay? So, you know, and many firms just head down the route of saying, okay, I'm going to protect it. And then you've got people sending emails all over the world, right? And you've got, you know, the whole thing around transparency, doing analytics that you shouldn't be doing, etc. So that's quite an important aspect, and this is what's challenged many firms in terms of, you know, people's perceptions, thinking just security is going to do this job for me. And then the other thing that's why it's pure genius and why these people who took them 4 years to develop, right, did an amazing job is because it's made privacy very interesting. And for those who look at interesting careers, you know, there's aspects of human rights, there are aspects of ethics, aspects of law, understanding law. You know, you will not kill, right? You will not harm. And so that's quite people are used to that in law. In the world of data, people were never used to that. What do you mean adequately protect? Tell me what I got to do. Okay? Technology, data, of course, and culture. So all of these fascinating topics. So it makes great careers, and people, you know, in privacy are now in very high demand, as you can clearly appreciate. And what's been the biggest impact? To me, the biggest impact I've seen on firms is that this is the first regulation to have brought the entire organization together to cooperate on a piece of legislation. There's been a lot of legislation. There's been technology rules. There's been financial rules, insurance rules, brokerage, from, you know, every single type of regulation. But this is the first one where virtually everyone is involved. You know, you can't escape. You're a silo, a business unit. You're a department. You're HR. You're marketing. You're the legal department, right? Your technology, right? Your project managers. Everyone has had to come to the table to implement this piece of regulation. And many people never knew each other before. This is the first time people have met each other in this. So it's actually had massive benefit because for one time, organizations are learning how to cooperate with each other on this. So thank you, GDPR, and that's why I call it genius, because it's had lots of benefits other than just, you know, data privacy. Now let's look at the next topic, which is, I just want to talk a little bit about what does a digital era data-centric organization actually look like. So we have GDPR. And here's the question is, from what industry does my favorite digital enterprise come from? Okay. So, you know, it's a small audience. Any thoughts? Which industry? Have a guess. Guesses? Insurance, banking, marketing, medical technology. That's a good, almost close, but close. It's an old people's home. Yes. Now, why on earth would an old people's home be my favorite digital enterprise? That's a question. Okay. When I saw what you're about to see, I was actually visiting a relative, and I just simply stood, and you know when you have that look, and you know if you like diamonds or cars, and you know you see this amazing car or amazing diamond or amazing dress or amazing house or whatever it is, and you stare at it, and that's what it was. It's this. Okay, this is like an old people's home in Canada. It's called South Lake Village, and we're visiting a relative. I was walking through the corridor in a rush, my wife and I then kind of paused and waited, and I was staring at this. This is a data-centric organization. Okay? The best example I've seen. Out in front of everyone, in the middle of the corridor, this massive, massive board, laying bare the organization and the way that it thinks about data, about its quality, about the safety, the people, the finance, the community, everything about data. They measured it, and they put it to bear right in front of everyone to see. And not only that, look underneath, they've got their values, right? So it's supported by residents first. This is an old people's home. It's actually in Canada, outside Toronto, and they actually, what they do is, instead of having people living in old people's homes, they actually have them like, it's almost like a hospital stroke old people's home. It looks like a hospital. And the residents first, like always consider residents' rights. Communicate right at the bottom. Seize every moment, it matters. And all this is projected via data and metrics and surveys and soft and hard metrics. It's absolutely amazing, right? And that's what you want to see, is organizations measuring everything they do and driven by those metrics, by that data, by that information they collect, be it soft metrics or hard metrics. And this is, quite an amazing diagram. It's cut up at the top because I was in a rush and kind of being dragged. We're late. So just took a picture and a bit sideways. I need to do some editing on this photo. But that's basically what it is for me. So let's move on. And of course, it treats data like an asset. Data is a key asset. Everybody says that, but is it? I love to take pictures, as you've probably realized by now. And I was sitting at a conference, actually, in London, listening to an interesting presentation. And then I stared down at this chair, and I thought, what is that tag on this chair? Actually, what it was is a unique identifier. These chairs had unique identifiers. Can you believe it? Isn't it amazing? This is a physical asset, so it's got tagged. You know where it is, you know where it sits. You move it, that number stays with it. And this is what we need to do with data, right? Data is so fluid. Unfortunately, when you move, you cut, you chop, and change, right? You create copies of it, and you're not unable to track it and know where it came from, where it originated from. So treating it like an asset means knowing where your data is, being able to have inventories, and controlling your data environment. So this is unique IDs. And also they recognize data opportunities. Good organizations look at that. I mean, this is kind of from a watch people wear nowadays, right? And you've got loads and loads of data and metrics about everything. I've done my outdoor run, my calories, the distance, the elevation, even when I'm swimming, where I'm swimming to and from, right? And there's so many opportunities there, right? And I thought, gosh, if I was them, I'd say, Hany, after a long swim, would you like an ice cream? Because, you've now, did a really good swim, you're back at the beach, could you have an ice cream? But of course, only if you have my consent to do so, okay? So this is, again, I didn't want to be fined 4% of my global turnover, and especially if there's regulators here in the room. So I thought I'd better put my consent there. But, you can see how much data is being collected about you as an individual. And, I trust it. It's sitting somewhere on the cloud clearly, right? But I do trust it, and it's there. And they've not abused it, which is quite good. So it feels okay. Although the most recent example, I think, which really annoyed me was picking up my phone, somebody called me, and it said, Roger is calling, and in brackets, maybe. I said, well, hold on a second. It's either Roger or it isn't Roger. How can it be Roger maybe? Why maybe? And then I realized that the phone app can look through your emails and recognize the name and a number from your emails. And then when somebody calls you, it picks up the name and says, oh, it could be Robert because Robert sent you an email and in his signature he's got that number or whatever. And somewhere I've consented apparently to that. I mean, I don't know what setting that is. It's somewhere apparently on your phone. And that's amazing, right? That scared me. It's like, how does it know it's maybe, right? So, that's what's going to challenge many firms in GDPR. The next one is predictive, right? So I was at the airport flying to Riga in Gatwick, and suddenly I get this email about airport parking. And I'm thinking to myself, that's interesting. I'm at the airport, and I only get these, once every couple of months. And suddenly I'm getting this airport parking. Are they tracking my location? Do they know where I actually am? Or has somebody given that information, that in fact I'm flying to Riga from London, to them? So that's a bit scary. And again, special offer, that's good, but as long as, again, with my consent, it's fine. It's good, it's helping me. The other thing is predictive. This is a true chart. It's a true chart of my resting heart rate. Resting heart rate is a great way to track your state of health, by the way. And I was traveling to Boston many months ago, and I looked back at my resting heart rate, and I thought this peak, I said, that's a bit strange. I fell ill, by the way, in Boston, etc. And the fascinating thing about this was, this is kind of my normal range, resting heart range, okay? And I never fall ill, right? Very rarely. In 15 years, I've taken one sick day off, right? And that trip to Boston just knocked me totally out. Fascinating in that at that point, when the heart rate was rising, right, at 0.2, I was actually ill at 0.1, okay? Right? And I felt ill only later. So in other words, your resting heart rate is a predictive indicator that there's something wrong with you. There's something is amiss. And again, nobody's used that data, but I just realized when looking at that, think, wow, that's amazing. So actually, if I had tracked it and over 2 or 3 days, you could see an increasing pattern, you know there's something wrong with you. And you can't even feel it. You feel nothing. But if you look at those metrics, so it's what the data is telling you is fascinating. And you see the advent of these tracking devices. It's incredible. The next generation is going to be tracking, perhaps your blood pressure, even perhaps doing more sophisticated tests on the go. Right. And open data, final topic here. And again, I think, digital era, if you open up your data, it's incredible what the power of the public, the enterprise, the fintechs, the technology firms, innovation can do. This is kind of a typical app. You've probably seen it in Latvia anyways, for trains. But the fascinating thing is even as you're traveling in the train, it tracks on real time. So you know the train you're on, what time you are going to arrive at the next station, what platform it is, and what have you, right? It's a lovely app. And you can even wake you up so you don't sleep in terms of the time when you're allowed to reach the station. So that's kind of open data is, opening the right data up is an absolute key to success as well for many organizations. The final thing I want to talk about is around the need for data standardization. And so you ask yourself, why has GDPR been so difficult? It's a legislation, you got some data, large organizations, right, struggled with it. And why is that? Okay. And the way I answer it is when I look at the difference between a screw and data. Okay. And what is the difference? One difference between a screw and data. Probably hard to guess, okay, so I'm going to put you out of the misery. This screw has got an ISO standard, a very prescriptive ISO standard associated with it. Okay. Now, I've actually, believe it or not, bought that standard. You have to buy the standards. So I spent, 80 euros to buy a standard for a screw. You think I'm mad, right? But it is. It belongs to me, the standard. I've got it, 68-1. Okay. Unfortunately, we don't have such data standards. And what you really want to do, and I'll show you a little bit more about this ISO 68. So don't take any pictures because this is copyright. Okay. It's called 68 euros. Anyways, you can see how well prescribed it is. On the right-hand side, you have the pitch, right, of the screw, the lengths, you have a table, exactly. And so when you buy a screw, you know exactly what kind of screw you're going to get, it's going to work, right? And we don't have that with data, right? So you go to an enterprise, right? You'd open it up, you look at a system, look at a file, pick up a file, look at it. It's got some information in it. There's no mandated standard by which we can prescribe this file, store it, manage it, transport it. Everybody does it differently. And so now when we're saying data flows, go protect your data, nobody knows what to do with this, right? Because it's everywhere. It's in every shape, every format, every vendor, right? And so really what we're encouraging firms to do and organizations to be involved in standards is to really build it. And the answers you need are quite simple. When you open up this piece of data information about a subject or about a number of subjects, what type of data am I looking at? Where did it come from? Okay. What access rights apply to this data? When was it last changed and by whom? And if we can answer all these questions, right, and what other rules apply to it? So what security rights, right, apply to this? So, privacy is only one of a number of regulations, right, that govern data. So, by encapsulating all that in a standard, I think this would make future digital enterprises much more effective, much more controlled, much more governed. And it's unfortunate that that hasn't happened many, many years ago, but this is, so to speak, it's crying out for this now, right? People are seeing it, they're suffering the pains. And that's really ultimately what we need to do. Of course, there's 27,001 data security, but again, it's prescriptive, but not prescriptive enough. So that's kind of my final sort of plea, really, to the industry. And that was it. I think we're doing well on time. Good. Brilliant. Brilliant.
On time. Okay, Hall. Now you've had your coffee, right? You're ready to ask some questions, right? I see hands, right? Oh, I see one. No? Yes? There is a hand? Yeah, there is a hand. Okay. Now, in order to properly hear you or record this, I will personally hand you that microphone, which is right over here, so we can simply hear your question. And I hope it's on. It is on. Okay, here you go, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. My question is, you said that the GDPR was made 4 years. Business is still struggling with GDPR, and this is our first day, and you said that we should take it in our culture. What is your assumptions? How will take time to business make with GDPR in their culture, in the corporate culture?
Okay, thank you. Good question.
Yes, very good question. So I think everybody is now sort of grappling. I mean, everyone is trying to get over that line, right? Everybody's saying, right, okay, I got over the line. But I think that, and everybody recognizes that they need to change the culture. Education is important, right? So there's no doubt about that. And I think that culture takes time to change, but most good firms are going to recognize that breaches are going to still happen, even with all that work. They're going to still have issues with data subject. They're going to be still doing analytics that they didn't think they were doing. And ultimately, they recognize more and more that it's about the people, it's about the culture. So I think it's going to take some time. Some of them have recognized, some of them through continuous mistakes are going to sit back and say, we spent 50 million on this. Why isn't it working? It's not working because you haven't changed the culture. Fundamentally, you have to believe that this is about human rights, about the individual and the respect of the individual. And that's the only way that you're going to prevent losses and damages. Of course, you want to prevent cyber. I'm not saying you don't spend money on cyber, right?
Okay. Thank you, Hany. A nice applause to Hany. And yes, nice thank you certificate from the organizers, and of course, something for a nice snack. Yeah, just to remember Latvia with a nice touch.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.